Hi, I'm Phil and I'm a late diagnosed older autistic adult. In this video, I want to look at some key things that I've discovered about myself that I had no idea were related to being autistic. If you are interested in seeing more videos about my experience of being autistic and issues important to autistic adults, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below. This helps get the message out to a wider audience by letting the YouTube algorithm know that people are interested in this topic. Also, before we begin, an important point to note is autism is a spectrum of challenges and abilities. As such, no two autistic people will have the same experience or same traits. Non-autistic people may relate to any of the traits I list in this video. Relating to individual traits does not make someone autistic. Likewise, if you don't relate to everything that I list in this video, that does not mean you're not autistic either. It is a combination of certain general traits and experiences that can lead to an autism diagnosis. The purpose of this video is to show a snapshot of some autistic traits and experience to help people who may be on the journey of autism self-discovery and to educate everyone else about autism in general. Okay, let's dive into the 15 things about me I did not realise were autistic. Starting off at number 1 is face blindness. Technically called prosopagnosia, it is a difficulty in recognising and remembering faces. This was a light bulb moment for me when I started to hear about other autists' experiences and discovered this is a common trait. Face blindness is something that has been with me for my entire life. I guess I did not realise as a younger child that my experience was any different to anyone else, but gradually over time realised I was not the same as everyone else in this. For me, this means when I meet someone at a work or social event, 2 minutes later I probably won't recognise that person as someone I've met and may even introduce myself to them again, which of course is embarrassing, especially if I've just had a conversation with that person. This may also mean I don't recognise friends or acquaintances in the street unless they say hi first. I say may here, as with many things autistic, there are no hard and fast rules. Sometimes I might see the back of someone and instantly recognise them or recognise someone that others don't. Watching TV or movies creates a whole lot of confusion, as I get all the characters confused from scene to scene if they have the same colour hair or other similarities. Often when watching TV, Trish will ask me, do you recognise that actor? Usually because we've seen them in something else we've just watched. But the answer is usually nope. But again, as in total contrast, I might recognise an actor from something we saw ages ago where Trish doesn't. Although maybe this is because they look quite different and it's the other features about them and not the face that sparks the recognition. Number 2, a skewed sense of pain. I sometimes don't feel pain in consistent ways. Where this fits is in the unevenness of this autistic sensory experience. Pain is felt as a sensation as part of the interoceptive sensory system in the body. Interoception deals with internal sensations like pain, hunger, thirst, core body temperature awareness, knowing when you need to go to the toilet, etc. When I was younger, I discovered that I could step outside pain and look at it objectively. This occurred when a doctor was trying to reset a dislocated thumb that had been out for many hours. Even with her foot against the chair pulling with all her might, she could not reset the joint. At that point, I discovered I could step outside the rather excruciating pain and compartmentalise that as a sensation that I did not necessarily have to feel. In that moment, I was also able to fully relax the joint and let it just pop straight back in. Subsequently, I discovered I could do this process on demand, but the intensity of thought required in doing so was such that it was actually preferable just to experience the pain. I need to stress here that this is my experience and not one other autistic people may experience. The key point is the difference in the pain system from the norm. Some autistic people might feel pain more strongly than neurotypical people. Other autists might feel intense pain in some instances but have much lower response in others. The key point here is the difference from what neurotypical people might experience. Number 3, perfectionism. Perfectionism is an interesting one in that it is not an autistic attribute listed in the Diagnostic Manual for Diagnosing Autism, but that being said, it is a trait that seems to be quite common in autistic people. One of the key aspects of autism is rigid thinking, which can be viewed as black and white thinking. Perfectionism comes from this black and white thinking, as something is either perfect or it's not good enough. I can find this very frustrating, as quite often I might work on a project and maybe it's a task that I'm not expertly skilled in, but the expectation on myself is for the result to be of a very high standard, and if that standard is not achieved, this can lead to disappointment and even meltdowns. Number 4, honesty and values driven. When I approached learning about autism, I was not expecting that topics like honesty, values, fairness, loyalty, and animal welfare would come up as being things that autistic people experience and value. I was surprised that these things would be so core in the autistic mind, but likewise, I found that I resonated with them in my own experience. Now, to be clear, this is not to say that neurotypical people are all liars and cheats, but it appears that neurotypical people will be more likely to bend the truth, particularly in situations where it might be more socially acceptable to do so. For example, when someone asks, "How are you?" intended as a greeting, the expected response is, "Good, thank you, how are you?" This simple interaction can be uncomfortable to an autistic person, as maybe the actual answer is, "I feel lousy," or "I'm tired, my back hurts." And while we may stick to the script, it feels uncomfortable to do so. We may answer, "Yep, good," but the expected return question is omitted because we may not actually be truthfully that interested in how the other person actually is, or we're just keen to get this awkward ritual out of the way. These types of interactions can lead to the assumption that autistic people are just basically rude. On values in particular, for me, this has always been a really strong factor in choosing who I work for. When I graduated from uni as an applied physicist, one of the key employers in my field was the defence industry. At that time, I was unable to align that industry with my perceived values, so that avenue was closed to me, and limited opportunities elsewhere meant I did not ever get the chance to work in my chosen field. In hindsight here, I recognise that my autistic black and white thinking only led me to the conclusion that work in that industry leads to making weapons to kill people. But I acknowledge now that there may be beneficial areas in that work also. I've also found myself tied to clients in my audio engineering work that I feel align with their values. Number 5, decision-making issues. Again, yet another aspect of autism that when I realised was common in the autistic community felt like a huge relief, as this is me to a T. I have often been labelled as indecisive in all facets of my life. The bigger the decision, the more paralysing the result. In fact, at its simplest, can be just going to the shopping centre to buy something. Me going to the shopping centre to buy something specific, walking up between all the shops, getting to the end, walking back again, then just leaving. Going home and then berating myself for not buying what I went there for. In my mind, I'm having the conversation, do I really need it? Do I know exactly what I'm after? Will I have to talk to a shop assistant? Should I just save my money? Buying presents for someone is much worse, as the doubt and anxiety around making that decision usually leads to the same result. This can be at its worst trying to buy a wedding present in particular. In fact, when Trish and I got married, we were both in favour of requesting that guests don't bring presents because we did not want others to have to go through the present buying hell. But we were told by other people that maybe that's not hell for most other people, and buying a present is what most people want to do. So we relented with that and went with the normal approach and got nice presents. But it was still stressful thinking about others having to go through that on our behalf. Big life decisions can be paralysing. I'm unable to make big decisions if there is pressure to do so. I will just walk away in these situations. Number 6, autistic inertia. I had never heard the term autistic inertia before starting down the autism research rabbit hole, but it also describes me accurately. So what is autistic inertia? It comes from an analogy of Newton's first law of motion, which is known as Newton's law of inertia, and states, a body remains at rest or in motion at constant speed in a straight line, except insofar as it is acted upon by a force. The autistic version of this is that if an autist is doing something, we will likely want to keep on doing it and not know when to stop. This also includes not realising when we need to eat or drink or go to the toilet. This can be even more extreme when we're working on an intense interest. I find I have to set times for things like lunch breaks, which also provides the opportunity to go to the toilet. If I'm working on a project with my dad who shares many of the same traits as me, we will both just keep working and working without eating or drinking. Likewise, if autistic people are at rest, it's really hard to start something new. This can take on many different forms. For me, some examples are working on new projects around the house. I might have a clear idea of what the goal is and how to achieve it, but starting is really difficult, particularly if it's going to be a big project or if there's some demolition work to be completed prior to building the new bit. It can also be as simple as getting off the couch to go to bed at the end of the evening, or stopping doom scrolling on the phone to do something useful. Number 7, running everywhere. I've mentioned this one in my previous videos. This is something that has a commonality with some autistic people. Basically, I tend to run everywhere rather than walking. For example, going between the car and the shops. Even running to the shed and back again to get a new tool if I'm working on something around the house. I even had one day when I was on a holiday many years ago when I went to the beach and basically ran up the beach in the soft sand to the next town. Stopped, had a bit of a sunbake and a swim, then ran back. Then spent the evening running and walking around the town I was staying in. When I got back to my tent that night, I looked at my step counter and had done 42 kilometres, or the equivalent of a full marathon, in my restful day. I footnote this with the fact that I don't run for exercise or as a fitness hobby. In fact, if I try to run for fitness, I can't last more than about 500 metres. I guess running in this way is a type of stim or emotional energy release, but it is possible that it might also be an ADHD trait, but I'm yet to explore that further. Number 8, food issues. I won't go into detail here as I've covered this in my previous videos quite extensively, other than to say that I did not realise that what people call fussy eating is a common part of the autistic experience, as one aspect of sensory overstimulation, whether that be to things like texture, taste, type of food, vegetables, etc. One point that is worth mentioning here is that there is a strong link between autistic food hypersensitivities and several eating disorders. The one I want to talk about specifically is ARFID. Avoidant Restricted Food Intake Disorder, or ARFID, is a feeding or eating disorder in which individuals significantly limit the volume or variety of foods they consume, causing malnutrition, weight loss, and/or psychological problems. Unlike eating disorders such as anorexia nervosa and bulimia, body image disturbance is not the root cause. Individuals with ARFID may have trouble eating due to the sensory characteristics of food, appearance, smell, texture or taste, executive function dysregulation, fears of choking or vomiting, low appetite, or a combination of these factors. While ARFID is most often associated with low weight, ARFID occurs across the whole weight spectrum. While I don't have a diagnosis of ARFID, it does accurately describe my eating, particularly as a child. Okay, moving on. Number 9 on our list is aphantasia, hyperphantasia, and hyperphantasia. I'd never heard of any of these conditions before, but put simply, they are a spectrum of conditions defined as follows. Aphantasia is the inability to visualize images in the mind. Hyperphantasia is the condition of having extremely vivid mental imagery. Hypophantasia is a condition where visual imagery is very limited or absent. While aphantasia and hypophantasia sit at one end of the visualization spectrum, where there is limited or no mental imagery, hyperphantasia sits at the other end of this spectrum, where images are vivid and real. Neurotypical visualization sits somewhere in the middle between these two extremes. Autistic people will often, but not always, sit at one end or the other in this visualization realm. Some will have hyperphantasia and others either hypo or aphantasia. For me, I believe I am described by hypophantasia. I have very limited access to mental imagery. If I try to pull up a memory or imagine an image, I get a fairly vague colourless image that very quickly fades to black. I describe it as like the image being behind me, and if I turn around to try and glimpse it, it fades away. This also affects the way I work out problems, whether it's maths or laying out a building project, in that I have to write the stuff down and draw it on paper, as I just can't hold all the details in my mind long enough to put it together to come up with an answer before it vanishes. This may also be related to my face blindness as discussed earlier. Part of that condition for me is I can't hold the image of a face in my mind, not even of my closest family. Number 10. Demand avoidance. No. Sometimes called pathological demand avoidance, it refers to a pattern of behaviour where individuals consistently resist or avoid tasks, responsibilities, or expectations placed upon them. The above sounds extreme, particularly as the word pathological conjures up all sorts of negative connotations. The reality here is that autistic people may have a tendency to say no as a first response, and in fact, this is something that I find myself doing instinctively, and has been something that has caused tension in my relationships. It might be that I'm actually happy to do the task, or in agreement of the statement that was just made by the other person, but for some reason the word no comes out first. Another way that demand avoidance can appear is when there is a task that is needed doing, and the autistic person might have overcome autistic inertia to make a start on the task, and then the other person might casually say something along the lines of, "Can you do that thing?" without realising you've already made a start. But that demand at that time creates an overwhelming desire to stop doing the task. Granted, everyone experiences some form of this, but for an autistic person, this is so much more pronounced. For me, another area this often emerges is when I get called by a potentially new client to do some work, and usually my first response is no, which is not great for business. There are a whole lot of reasons why accepting work from a new client leads to this response, and all of them can be tracked back to the different aspects of my autistic challenges. Some of these might include anxiety with working with new people, change in general, autistic inertia, starting something new, or processing delay. Number 11 on our list of things about me that I did not know were autistic is literal thinking. Due to our more rigid thinking approaches, autists tend to be more literal than neurotypicals. This might mean we miss subtleties in jokes or some sarcasm, although it is a myth that autistic people don't understand sarcasm. Every autistic person is different, so don't assume one autist's response will match another autist's response. For me, I can generally decode things that are not meant to be taken literally, but it takes a moment to do so. In my brain, I pull apart the literal meaning first. Then, once satisfied that that is nonsensical, I then try to work out what's actually meant. Maybe this is how everyone does it, but for me it just takes a bit more time. For many autistic people, following instructions is preferable to just winging it. But those instructions need to be explicit, because we will have the tendency to take them literally. As an example, before I understood much about my autism, I was setting up for a concert in a large auditorium, and the person who was setting up the chairs was struggling to get the lines straight. I noticed there were some straight line markings on the floor for a different purpose, so I suggested that he use those lines as a guide. When I looked back a while later, every chair was beautifully aligned with those lines on the floor. However, the lines were there for some other reason and were quite close together, so now all the chairs were straight but scrunched up together with no legroom. I don't know if he was autistic, but either way, his literal interpretation of my suggestion was more symptomatic of my non-specific instruction, and the error was clearly mine. At number 12, we have general interoception difficulties. As mentioned earlier, interoception is the body's sense that informs us of what's happening on the inside, things like not being aware when we're hungry or thirsty until we feel ill or faint. This can also mean I don't know when I'm feeling full and to stop eating. Pain, as talked about earlier, or not being able to process our emotions effectively or be able to describe what we are feeling. This is called alexithymia. Internal temperature response. For me, I often feel cold, so much prefer warm weather or even having hot showers to warm up. Another aspect of interoception that affected me as a child was that I went through a period of being a bedwetter. The link back to interoception here is not being aware of needing to wake up to go to the toilet until it's too late. While this is not unique to autistic children, this can be more common in autistic children. At number 13 on our list, we have rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is an emotional reaction to negative judgments, exclusion, or criticism beyond what most people feel. Other people may see those with RSD as overly perfectionistic, overly sensitive, or overly reactive to even the mildest types of criticism. RSD is common amongst people with autism and other neurodiversities such as ADHD. This may also play into the fact that autistic people often have a fear of being perceived or judged by others. This can lead to the autistic fawning response, which is where the autist may abandon their own needs in an effort to serve the needs of others to avoid conflict or rejection. Excessive fawning can then lead to emotional dysregulation, resulting in things like meltdowns, shutdowns, or burnout. Number 14, processing delay. This is a big one for me, and I dare say for all autistic people. In fact, processing delay is considered one of the core features of autism, so making the generalisation that it affects all autists seems logical, even though every autist has different experiences and challenges. Please correct me here if I'm wrong though. It is interesting to me that although this is a key aspect of autism, I did not know it was at all related, and I suspect that the general population would not know this aspect of autism either. So what is processing delay? It is a literal delay in processing information from any of the senses, which leads to a delay in subsequent actions. The obvious one here is auditory processing. You might ask me a question and I might look blank for several seconds before I even acknowledge that you've spoken. Also, I might need time to process my answer, and that amount of time might be anywhere from seconds to days or longer. One important accommodation that autistic people need in all aspects of life is the freedom to be able to say, "I'll need to get back to you on that." At this point, it might seem pretty obvious that this might not play out well in the workplace or even at worst in a job interview. This can be a barrier to employment in general for autistic people. It's also easy to see why processing delay might exacerbate an autist's socialising difficulties, particularly in a cluttered and overwhelming auditory environment. This processing delay can play out in any of the sensory systems. Some other examples are as follows. Not immediately being aware that you are hungry or thirsty until you feel sick or faint. This can also have the opposite effect in not being immediately aware when you're full and need to stop eating. Also not being aware of the need to go to the toilet until you're busting. This might also be because of hyper-focusing on a task and not noticing other bodily needs. Sometimes this might mean that I get caught out in public and urgently have to find a public toilet or race home. We're starting to see a loop back here to what we discussed earlier with interoception difficulties. Continuing on, autists may also have a delay in processing things like pain or other sensory inputs, which might be early warning signs of environmental danger. It stands to reason, although I've not seen any research to back up this assertion, that processing something as simple as fear might mean an autist ends up in dangerous situations that might have been avoided. I know in my experience I've put myself into some dangerous situations because I did not seem to adequately process the level of danger through a timely fear response. Significantly also, autistic people may experience a delay in emotional responses. This might mean an autistic person appears calm in a crisis, but be aware that the delay in processing might mean those emotions impact on the person at a much later time. Thus, the autistic person may not appear to need support, but fall apart when no one else is around as a response to trauma or grief. At number 15 on our list, we have warm water and immersion in water. When I discovered that these things are common to some autistic people, it was a light bulb moment for me, as I have always found I like to be immersed in warm water. Again, we are looping back to how we respond differently to our senses. In this case, both proprioception and interoception. Responding to water in this way can be a very sensory-seeking aspect in our autistic sensory experience. The feeling of being immersed in water of any temperature can be centering for an autistic person's sense of where we are in space, which is our proprioceptive sense. The feeling of the water pushing against us from all sides and holding us as we float or swim is soothing, as it activates the touch sense evenly in all of our body parts, giving the proprioceptive sense a moment of clarity and definition. If the water is also warm, as mentioned earlier, I find that is also soothing, as I am often cold in my general existence. And finally, at number 16, we have creativity. The stereotype of autism is we are cold, analytical, black and white, emotionless thinkers, which does not lend to creative expression. It's true that autistic people view the world differently, but that in itself, rather than stifling creativity, just leads to a different perspective, allowing for unique expressions of that creativity. This might be in any of the traditional visual arts such as painting or photography, but also music or sound design. This creativity can also lead to unique approaches to problem solving and science, or philosophical thought. Basically anywhere where creativity would be beneficial. Autistic people can provide huge value because that difference in creative approach can lead to a set of diverse outcomes when also paired with the output of neurotypical peers. Okay, so that's it for now. If you want to find out more about what autism is, what it isn't, and why I decided to get an official autism diagnosis, please feel free to check out my 2-part video of my introduction to autism. I will leave a link to that in the video description. And remember, if you want to see more videos on my experience with autism, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below. Thanks for watching. See you next time.